Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. In this video I want to take you through how to cut and sew a mermaid dress with an off-shoulder bustier bodice and a Basque waistline. So these are the materials I have here. I'm using a red George for this. This is the lining piece that will go with it and a matching zip. You're also going to need medium thick wording, stay, and plastic boning for this. Of course, the pattern will be needed to cut out the bodice. So I have a tutorial on how to draft this pattern on my channel. If you're interested in that, you'll find it in the description box. This video will help give an insight into how to make a bustier look like a Victorian corset, and you're also going to learn how to join a bodice to a skirt that has a V-shaped waist. So if you have been wondering how to do that without sewing like a corset and doing the inbuilt corset process, then this video is for you. Here's a quick recap on the pattern drafting tutorial. So what you want to do is cut this pattern on the fabric, and of course you know you have to cut on fold. So I arranged the pattern on the design part of the George and also cut it on my lining piece. So for this George, you're going to need 2 pieces for the lining because the George has holes in it. So you want one lining to cover up the holes and another one to serve as the actual lining. So one will be like the interfacing for it. We're going to move on to cutting the skirt before moving on to the bustier part of this tutorial. So to make this very quick and easy, you are going to be working with an already made skirt pattern. I'm actually using like my dress pattern, but I can fold it up to get my skirt pattern out of it. So what you want to do is to first of all measure the skirt length. The skirt length is the difference between the half length and the full dress length. So I already marked that out. That will be the guide for placing the pattern piece. So I'm just folding up my pattern to get my skirts out of it, and you want to make sure that this is on fold for the front. I'm cutting the front part first. The pattern has to be well secured on the fabric before you go ahead to cut. So I folded up the skirt pattern to stop right at the above knee point, because when you are cutting a mermaid skirt, the panel added to the normal straight skirt always starts from the above knee point. Okay, that is how it is. So I'm just adding my seam allowance on the sides because there is no seam allowance on the pattern piece. So I've marked out the seam allowance to stop right at the above knee point. What you want to do is connect from here straight down, making sure that you have the same thing equally. So it is after doing that that you can now measure how much or how wide you want the panel to be. So after connecting the straight line to meet with the end of the fabric, I added 12 inches. So this is how wide I want my panel to be, and this is already giving me that mermaid skirt vibe. So you can see that I also arranged the pattern piece for the design on the George to be at the hem of the skirt. So take note of the way you arrange your fabric when cutting. Now I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out. You can see that I also added half of an inch above this to serve as the joining allowance. So after cutting the front, I'll use the front piece to cut the back piece. I'm going to be adding a tail to the back of the dress. So if you do not know how to cut a mermaid skirt with tail, then you just keep on watching and I'll also show you guys the process. So to add a tail to a mermaid skirt, you basically want it to be on the center back of the skirt. So for the side of the skirt, you're just going to cut exactly the same thing for the front and for the back, while you're also going to add a panel to the center back of the skirt, which will also stop at the above knee point. But I like to go 2 inches above the knee point for the back. So I did not add a dart to the front of the skirt, but I added to the back, which is why I added the waist here. Then you also want to make sure that you add zip allowance to the center back. Remember that the pattern doesn't have seam allowance, and of course zip allowance can't even be added to the front skirt pattern. So I added that for the back. Now that I've marked all of that out, I can now add the panel to the center back. That is basically how to cut the tail. So I actually do not have enough fabric to make the tail as long as I want. So I just tilted the fabric a bit to make sure that the sides for both the front and the back match. After making the tail slightly longer, you can see it is longer by just 2 inches. But if you want like a tail that is 5 to 10 inches long, then you have to do a lot more modification. I do have a tutorial on how to do that, but it is a paid course. If you're interested, the details is also going to be in the description. So I'm also going to go ahead and cut this out, and that is it for the back. I'll then use this to cut my lining piece. After cutting the lining and the main fabric, I'll just go ahead and turn the lining and the fabric together and take in the darts. So I'm not going to be showing that process, so we can move on to the main thing. Just make sure that you turn the lining for the front separate and the lining and the fabric for the back separate as well. So this is all of my pattern piece. I just want to arrange it for you guys to see. As you guys can see, I have double the lining piece for the front, just like I explained earlier. We are going to be focusing on the front piece for now. So this front piece, you need to make sure that you pad it, because what is a bustier without padding? I'm just taking off my pattern to open it up. So because this George has holes, as you guys can see, I cannot pad directly on the George material. And also remember that the George material already has an interfacing, so that has to come first before padding it. So I'm just going to use hemming gum to fuse the lining and the George together before moving on to padding this. To pad this is where the medium thick wording comes in. One thing you need to notice that when you are using wording for anything, stay needs to be ironed to it first before ironing the wording on top. If not, it's not going to be smooth on the fabric. So before I do all of that, I just want to take you guys through how to cut out a wording for a bustier piece. Now this concept can be applied to any other kind of bustier you're working on, so just make sure that you pay attention. The first thing you need to know is that the wording piece must always stop right at the underbust point. So I'm using my George fabric to cut this because the lining piece is not stable enough to use for this process. First of all, you want to cut the wording piece out to match with the bustier pattern, making sure that it stops right on the underbust point. After doing that, the next thing to do is to then adjust it to make sure that it fits well and it looks more professional. The first thing I'm going to do is work on the center front. So I'm just coming from the center front down by 2 inches. So you want to just do this and cut the center front. Is usually the easiest part to do because you just want to make sure that it doesn't go into the neckline. And the general rule is that this should actually stop right at the chest line. So for the side, first of all, you want to take off the seam allowance, which is what I did. Then from the seam allowance, you're going to mark another 1 inch. Then I went ahead to also take off 2 inches from there. So you just want to make a curve from the underbust point to that 2-inch mark. Just go all the way like I just demonstrated with my hand. So I'm just using a chalk to highlight it before cutting. I'm sorry it's not very obvious on camera, but when I'm cutting it out, you're going to get what I'm saying. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out, and it is as simple as that. I'm now going to use this to cut the other side. The wording usually has 2 sides. The shining side has a glue to it. So you want to make sure that you're not cutting 2 right sides and 2 wrong sides, because the part with the glue is what will be fused to the fabric. So I went ahead to notch the wording piece so that I will not mix the part that is meant to be facing the curve and the bustier piece. So guys, it is as simple as that. I hope that that was very clear for you all to understand. So whether it is an off shoulder or not, this is how you want it to be. You don't want it getting into the seam allowance, getting into the neckline, and you also want it 1 inch away from the seam allowance. So now I'm going to go ahead and fuse the lining piece to the George material so that I can iron the wording, and don't forget to add stay first. So this is a display of all of the pattern piece. I have the main fabric and the lining laid out. So as you guys can see, I have the front piece here already. So for the back piece, it's quite easy. We are going straight into the joining process. For the back, I do not need to fuse the lining and the George before using the main lining, because I'm not going to be padding it. So for this back piece, you just want to face right sides together and use the 1/2 inch seam allowance to join it for both the lining and the fabric. So remember, I said that for the skirt, you should turn the lining and the fabric for the front separate and the lining and the fabric for the back separate. That is the same concept we are going to be applying to this, and that's because of the Basque design. So for the other side of the back piece, I'm just repeating the same thing. Make sure that you pin to avoid one fabric being shorter than the other. You just want to stitch it down, and then I'll repeat the same thing for the lining on the other side. So now let's move on to adding the wording to the front bustier pattern. This is a demonstration of what I explained earlier. So you can see that the lining piece, I already ironed the stay to it. Now I am adding hemming gum to the lining piece so that I can fuse the George material and the lining piece together. If you want to use iron to do this, you just heat up the fabric, the glue will melt and hold the two pieces together. After fusing the two materials, I'll go ahead and iron the wording to it. Remember, I said the wording usually has a shining side, which is where the glue is. So that is the part that you want facing the stay, and most times the glue doesn't hold well, so you can use hemming gum to also hold everything together, which is what I did. So now the next thing to do is to join all of this piece together. Always start from the bottom to the top when you're joining bustier pieces together, and it's advisable that you pin this down before sewing. I just skipped that, but if you're a beginner, please make sure you pin it to avoid stress. Even those that are not beginners, you're advised to always pin before sewing, but I just really wanted to do this really quickly. So you can see that this is standing really nicely. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side as well and repeat this same joining process for the lining piece for the front bustier. Remember, I already joined the back piece off camera. Is nothing extra, just to join with the 1/2 inch seam allowance. One important thing you need to do is to always notch after sewing to reduce tension and to make sure that the bust curve relaxes well, especially at the under bust point. Very important. So I'm just making tiny little slashes on the seam allowance for both sides to make sure that this is relaxed well. The next thing to do is to iron this out, and I'm going to show you guys a little hack for making sure that the curve area stays in the ironed state even after washing. So first you want to use a tailor's ham to iron this out, making sure that you spread the seam allowance open. You can see I'm using my iron to do this, and it's important to iron this on a tailor's ham to maintain the curve from the bustier piece. So now the trick is to use stay. So you're going to iron stay to the seam allowance, making sure that it is also spread open. So that stay is going to make sure that the seam allowance stays flat and it doesn't fold up when you wash it. And you can see the difference between the two of them already. So I've gone ahead to do the same thing for both sides, and I just did it all the way to the end. Now the next thing to do is to join the lining and the fabric together. So the style I'm going for, I want it to have a little strap, which is what I have here already. This strap is just what I took off the shoulder times 2. So you want to attach this strap neatly, and I'm going to show you guys how. First of all, you want this to be on the bust band line. That's like the best way to always make sure that your straps fit. So I'm facing the right side of the strap to the right side of the main fabric before placing the lining on top, so that when I stitch everything down, the strap will fit well and there will be no rough edge, so everything is going to be neat. So now for the back piece. For this back piece, you just want to also face right sides together and sew. So I'm going to do just the sides. I will not be touching the chest line or the armhole yet, because we're also going to do the strap method for this side, because of course the strap has to be connected from the front to the back. So this is the front already done. You want to make sure that you notch it, especially at that sweetheart point, to make sure that it relaxes properly, and trim off any excess if needed. So I'm going to just turn this right side out, and this is what I have. So now I've also stitched that back piece. I can now go ahead and add the strap to the back of the bustier. So I measured out the strap to be exactly what I want. To add the straps to the back is basically the same method for the front, but it's going to be looking a little confusing because of the way I'm doing it. You still want the right side of the strap to be facing the right side for the back piece. So I'm taking this away from my seam allowance a bit. So for the back, it's not compulsory for it to be on the bust span line, especially when it's not like a tube bustier. You do not want to be doing that. You want it to be matching with the armhole. I'm going to use a pin to secure it, then go ahead and finish up the armhole and also stitch down the top here, and I'll be right back. So guys, I've gone ahead to sew it, and now I'm just turning the right side out. This is what I have. So you can see how neat this is looking. This is how you want yours to be. I'm going to go ahead and iron it, then we'll move on to the skirt part. So yeah, this is what I want to show you guys how to do. This is the main. So remember that this bustier piece is a V cut out. From the pattern piece is already a V cut. So you want to place it on the skirt and then use a chalk to mark out that V-shaped design. Make sure that the skirt waist and the bustier waist is equal. If not, this is going to stress you out. So when you are cutting out that V shape on the skirt, you do not want to cut right on the chalk line. You want to cut half of an inch above it. Number one, it will serve as the seam allowance. Number two, there's a high chance that the cutout might expand, so even if it does, it will still fit. So this is me cross checking that the both sides are equal, and as you guys can see, it is a perfect fit. You are going to repeat that same process for the back. Let the waist match, and then just use a chalk to mark out the triangular design on the skirt and cut half of an inch above that chalk mark. After that, the next thing to do is to join the two pieces together. So it is important to note that for this back, the bust span must match with the joining at the back. So I've done one side already. Joining this can be quite confusing, but just use a pin and you'll be fine. So as you guys can see, the slant is in opposite directions, but as long as you took your measurements right and you cut it out properly, all you need to do is to pin it and stitch, and you see that it is a perfect match, like it fits like a puzzle. When you're joining, you want to use the 1/2 inch seam allowance, nothing more. If not, you're going to take off from your actual measurements. So for the rough edge, you either use a bias or you use a serger. So I've done the two sides, and this is what it looks like. Everything is meant to be equal if you used the right measurement when cutting and when joining. To join the front, you simply need to pin the right parts together. I know it looks confusing because the lines are in opposite directions, but just to make sure you pin it starting from the midpoint. That is the part you need to pin first. And also when you're pinning, you just want to pin the first half and stitch it down before moving on to the other half. If you try to pin it all at once and sew it all at once, it's not going to work out. It's going to stress you out and you'll be wondering what you are doing wrong. So as you guys can see, I stitched down the first part before moving on to the other, and I also started from the midpoint. When you are sewing, always start from the midpoint so that the lines will not shift. So I've done the first part and now I'm moving on to sewing the other side. When you're done sewing, you want to make sure that you notch this. For the rough edge, you can use a bias, you can use a serger to make sure that it is looking neat. Or if you can do like an inseam finishing, if you're like more experienced in sewing and you're watching this, you can use an inseam finishing to make this more professional. So guys, I've joined everything together, and now next thing to do is to join the sides. For these sides, you want to make sure that all of the joining is a match, which shouldn't be a problem if you took the accurate measurements, but it is always best to cross-check the sides that you are going to be joining before attaching the skirts and the bodice. Check that the bodice on both sides are equal and the skirt is also equal on both sides. So I'm just going to stitch down using my seam allowance. Make sure you cross-check your measurement. Then I'll also stitch down on the zip. I am really sorry that I couldn't capture adding the boning. I lost the footage of that, but I have so many other tutorials that shows that process. So this is what the dress is looking like so far. The next thing to do is to attach the sleeve. So the sleeve part is just something very simple. All I just need to do is to pleat this and attach it to the armhole. When you're sewing, you just want to fold in the fabric and stitch down the sides, leaving a little space to turn it back. Then you just pleat it and add it. This was like a very quick something I needed to use for an event, so I didn't go overboard with it. So this is just it here. I'm showing you guys in case you didn't get it. You can see I just pleated it and added it to the armhole, and with that the dress is ready. You can see that despite the fact that I did this hurriedly, it came out looking very beautiful, and I really hope that it helped you guys in making your own. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.